The Maze Runner Camp Math. Let me explain. So if you haven't seen my Clone Wars Camp Math video, well, what are you still doing here? Go watch that one. I explain this concept more in depth in that video. But the general description of this video boils down to a math equation that I created, A minus B equals C, where A is the number of characters in the scene, B is the amount of people who die, and C is the number of characters who remains afterwards. However, in a lot of shows and movies, there are certain scenes where C is not accurate, and there are more or less people remaining after when the scene began, aka the scene can't math.
What they see is just the end of the Dothraki, essentially.
Realistically, this is just my over-exaggerated way of pointing out continuity errors in movies with my own humor that is certainly an acquired taste. But when it comes to the Maze Runner series, there are certainly some areas where the films can't math. And there are 3 different examples that we will be covering today, with each one being more mathematically inaccurate than the one before. However, some of these are going to be a bit different to how we handled the Clone Wars video. Do you see this here? This is a grain of salt. I would like you to take my video with a bit of this. You see, we will still be using my equation for some of the examples, but for 2 of them, I am only correct in my argument that the math is incorrect under certain circumstances that can be widely debatable. And if you still don't understand what I mean, well, let's just hop into the first one and I think you'll get the hang of it. So the first one is the most controversial argument I'm going to make, and that's how many gladers are in the maze. Gladers, of course, are the guys stuck in the glade, go figure, surrounded by the maze. That part should be pretty straightforward. Now for this example, I don't need to use my equation because I simply want to figure out how many gladers are there at the start of the first movie. And there's a few very key pieces of information here. The first is given to us by Albie, who clearly states that 1 glader comes up from the box every month.
Whatever we need, the box provides. It's sent them once a month with fresh supplies and a new greenie. This month, that's you.
The second crucial piece of information is when Thomas and Newt are talking near the bonfire, and I want you to pay very close attention to what gets said here.
You see those guys, every morning when those doors open, they run the maze, mapping it.
How long have they been looking?
3 years.
So there's a lot of information here, but also a lot to be theorized. Newt says that they've been searching the maze for 3 years, which means it's been at least 3 years since they've been in the maze. Now the first thing we have to agree upon in order for my argument to work is, have the gladers been searching the maze since they've been here? Did Albie start searching the minute he got here since he was the first glader, and that's when the 3 years started? Or did they wait a few months before they started exploring it? What I'm trying to get at is, in order to find out how many gladers there are, we need to know how many years, but specifically months, they've been here. So for the sake of argument, for my theory, I'm going to go with the ideology that the gladers have been searching the maze since they got here. But again, that's up for debate. The second thing to address here is, how specific is Newt when he says 3 years? This is where I'm going to get incredibly mathematical. Let's say Newt said 3 years as a general number. I mean, this is a movie script for a teeny bopper dystopian world. They're not going to be super specific. But still, let's analyze this. If we think about the concept of math in terms of rounding, there's a few fairly agreed upon principles. One is that if a number has a decimal point higher than half of its standard value and you needed to round, you would round up to the nearest whole number. So in terms of Newt saying 3 years, he would only say 3 years if the amount of time in terms of months was less than 3 years and 6 months. If it was 3 years and 7 or more months, he would most likely just say 4 years, because saying 3 years and 7 months would not roll off the tongue as well. This is a movie. However, thinking about it more, if it was 3 years and 6 months, then he'd probably just say 3.5 years, right? That's a fairly sociable, acceptable way of saying that amount of time, right? Trust me, I'm getting to my point here. So if we can acknowledge that if it can't be equal to or higher than 3 years and 6 months, then 3 years and 5 months, or 41 months total, is the highest number of months Newt can mean when he says 3 years. Now that's the concept of if he was just being very general about the time frame, but he might seriously mean an exact 3 years, or 36 months. We don't know for sure. But with our reasoning, we can establish that with one argument, there should be 36 gladers, and with the other, there should be no more than 41. So now let's do the actual counting. Now there are many wide shots of the gladers throughout the movie, and I could go in scene by scene trying to keep track of every individual character to make sure everyone is accounted for, but that's way too much work, and despite how passionately I seem about this, I really don't care that much. I also could simply look at how many boys they casted for the movie on IMDb, but that seems like the easy way out, and I want to determine my answer based solely on what the movie can give me. So to make it easier on myself, I'm going to take this scene specifically to make my calculations. For context, this is the scene where Albie and Mino have not come back from the maze and the doors are about to close, so everyone is awaiting anxiously for them to show up. We can clearly see be every main character as well as every named side character present here, and there's no indication that there's any other gladers anywhere else. This should be everyone. And in this shot, we can count 33 characters, but that's not everyone. We also have to account for Albie and Mino, who are still on their way back. And we have to remember Ben, who is the character who got banished earlier in the film, which brings the number up to 36. But we still have more characters. Back in the beginning of the movie, Albie shows Thomas the wall where everyone has put their names, and there are at least 4 visible names crossed out, meaning 4 gladers have died. And remember, for the first example, we're just trying to figure out how many gladers there are in total. Unfortunately, they never show the full wall, at least from what I can tell, so for all we know there could have been more who died, but for the sake of this, we can just agree that there were 4, which brings the number up to 40. So my argument here is simple. If Newt was just saying 3 years to be more general and not overcomplicate the message to Thomas, then the math checks out. The most the gladers could be is 41, and we only counted 40, so that works. But if he meant 3 years specifically to the exact 36 months, the math does not work. I bet you felt like you just wasted your time listening to me go on about something that might not ever be wrong, huh? But fret not, you internet heathens, the next one will be slightly more concrete, with the last one being 100% proven to be mathematically inaccurate. For now, let's get on with the second example. So this one again is an example to take with a grain of salt, but it does have a bit more substance than the last one. Shout out to that fucked up movie. And it happens during the Griever Attack. Now before we can get into it, let's establish the glader number. Now despite where you stand on the first example, we can all agree that visibly we can count 40 gladers total, but by the time this scene happens, that number has changed. First we'll account for the 4 dead ones listed on the wall, which brings it to 36. And then also at this point, Ben has been banished and is out of the picture. However, we have since added Teresa to the group, and for the sake of keeping everything organized, I'm going to add her to the number, so by removing Ben and adding her, we keep it at 36. So that's the number of gladers we know exist before the Griever Attack. Now I want to get into how many remain after the attack. What's pretty nice is that the gladers split up into 2 groups at the end of the film, Thomas's group and Galley's group, and we get a few wide shots of both groups to make it a little easier in counting them. For Thomas's group, there are 13 total gladers, and in Galley's group, we can see 12. And again, there is no indication that there's any other gladers anywhere else. So after the Griever Attack, there are 25 remaining gladers, meaning 11 gladers died in the attack. Now let's take a look at what actually happened in the attack. And I'm first going to show you every instance in which a glader visibly gets killed by a Griever. And I'm going to go with the notion that every one of these guys do in fact die, since we don't see anyone with any injuries afterward.
Albie! Look out! Thomas, get them up!
So we can pretty clearly see 8 characters die, including Albie and Zart, rest in peace you legends, Comet 07 to Zart and Albie. But with 8 characters dead, that isn't a cause for concern in terms of the math, but what is how many characters we hear die. Now again, this is the grain of salt because I'm about to play you every cry and yell you hear in this scene, and the caveat is that some of our main characters yelled and they lived, so it doesn't necessarily mean that these ones died. It's also possible that the ones yelling are the same ones we see dying. That's definitely a theory. But let me just play them all, and you can decide. So we hear about 8 distinct death cries, and while not all of them may be definitive, it definitely feels like most of them are. And considering based on our math we only have 3 deaths to work with, and we heard 8 die, it's looking like it might not quite be accurate. Even if only half of those cries ended up being a glader dying, it's still off by at least a death or 2. Now I know what you're thinking. Okay, Aaron, you've shown us 2 examples where a lot of your arguments are based on guesses and hypothesis rather than actual fact. Should I even keep watching? And the answer is yes, 100%, because these first 2 were merely the appetizers for the main and final course, which is entirely the reason why I made this video in the first place. This third example is truly mathematically incorrect, and I will prove it with fact. So without further ado, let's get into it. So this final example is the only one that deals with both the first Maze Runner movie and the Scorch Trials, and it still deals with the number of gladers. In the last battle to escape the maze, Thomas leads the group with a total of 13 characters. But we lose 3 along the way, including Jeff, rest in peace Jeff, Comet 07 for him as well, which brings the number down to 10. And with this group being so small, I can pretty much name everyone now. We have Thomas, Teresa, Newt, Mino, Frypan, Chuck, Winston, Jack, who we'll get to him later because he's very important in this argument, and then 2 other gladers who I don't know their names, but it's these 2 guys right here. Then in one of the saddest scenes ever, we lose Chuck, which brings the number down to 9. For the last time, let's Comet 07 to our boy Chuck. So at the end of the first movie, we have 9 characters who have escaped the maze. Now let's move on to the Scorch Trials, where we can see our heroes once again. 8 of them. You see, curly-haired guy is now nowhere to be found. He literally just isn't there. Now I know some of you are gonna come at me and say that the actor probably just couldn't make it due to scheduling issues or an emergency. I don't actually know, and I'm not here to bash whoever he is for not being in this movie. Things happen. I will, however, call out the makers of this movie who did not find a replacement for this glader because my undiagnosed OCD is now through the roof. In terms of storytelling, what happened to this glader? Did he die on the way? Was he a figment of my imagination? What is it? But that is not even the worst offense in this movie. The other unnamed glader is still with them when they arrive, and then he disappears. At the cafeteria scene, we don't even see him, and when they get to their bunk beds, he's also nowhere to be found. We literally never see him again. Maybe he was one of the kids called, but I feel like if he was called, our main characters would be a bit more concerned. But they don't even acknowledge the existence of this guy or curly-haired guy in this movie, which I should mention, I really hate when movies do this. This is not even my joking, exaggerated self right now, this is legit criticism. I hate when movies have a small group like this where there's characters that just don't interact with the main characters at all. No speaking roles, no lines, not even them looking at the main characters or vice versa. It's just really weird and it makes it feel really closed off. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Hey guys, Editing Aaron here. Wanted to chime in really quick. When I was first watching this video back, I realized I was a big dumb dummy during most of it. First in the fact that my first 2 arguments are not all that strong, and I sound way too serious while I'm arguing them. But for this third one, I felt like an even bigger dumb dummy because I didn't even do the slightest bit of research about what I was talking about. But after some Googling, aka going on Reddit and reading YouTube comments, I can tell you that these 2 guys are actually named Billy and Tim. And some people confirm that Billy was in fact not in this movie at all, which proves me right. Ha! But for Tim, apparently he was actually one of the kids called in the cafeteria like I guessed.
Walt, Tim.
So it at least answers what happens to him, but it also reinforces my statement that Thomas and the main group didn't give a single shit about the other gladers such as him. Also, apparently Tim's one of the kids strung up in the secret lab that Thomas finds, but I cannot for the life of me tell you which one he is. Maybe he's this one? I don't know. I really don't care that much. Anyway, just wanted to leave that there so I don't get annihilated in the comments. At least more than I usually do. But yeah, so that's it. Bye-bye. Go leave a like and subscribe, please, and thank you. Okay, bye. Now back to the cafeteria. We don't see Teresa in this scene, but that's for story purposes, so she is there in retrospect. We do still see Jack, however, which is good at least. He's pretty much the only non-main character left, and he has a special place in my heart because when I was a bit younger, I felt like I looked like him, so I related to his character a lot, even though he's nothing more than a background character. Like seriously, look at him getting the cold shoulder by the rest of the group. I feel you, man. Unfortunately, he gets screwed over more and in the worst way, which is why I point him out. You see, once the gang figures out that Wicked is in fact not good, they escape. 8 of them. See, they pick up this kid named Eris, which makes the number 8, even though the number should be 10 if the movie remembered that these 2 exist. But I want to point out that they clearly escape with Jack and make it to the underground mall with him. He's right there. Then the Cranks attack and there's this whole action running scene where they eventually escape the mall. Without Jack. He's just gone. We had 8 go in, 7 come out, but we don't see anyone die. That's not how math works. Now I know this because I am such a big fan of these movies regardless of the entire video I just made, but the answer to Jack's fate is simple. They cut out his death scene. There is a whole moment where he dies to a crank and the group tries to save him but can't, that they completely cut out of the film. You can't do that. You can't just cut out someone's death, especially when it's a group of characters this small. It irks me. I feel irked. It's again stuff like this where I go from my exaggerated, somewhat joking manner to actual formed criticism on films. I hate when they delete scenes that have even somewhat relevant information that without it makes the film a little bit worse. Hey, editor Aaron again. So once again, I did a little more Google, Reddit, webbing, whatever, and found out that Jack's death scene was cut because apparently the audience in the initial test screenings didn't know who he was, so when he died, people were either confused or they just simply didn't care. Which
which I think is fair now that they cut the scene. That does make sense. But it also just shows how badly they handled these background glider characters. Like I said in my rant, if he had at least gotten a line or two or had been acknowledged by any of the main characters, maybe his death would have meant more. I guess we'll never know. Anyway, that's it. So editor Aaron is leaving again. So again, go subscribe again if you haven't. Thank you. Okay, goodbye.
Anyway, my point being is that this third example is the most definitive in my argument that the Maze Runner can't math. I guess specifically the Maze Runner 2, the Scorch Trials. It seems my undiagnosed OCD continues to prevail in useless analysis on beloved shows and films that I genuinely love. I should really get myself tested for OCD to see if I should or should not continue making these jokes. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed. These can't math videos are always really fun to make, so I hope you had a good time with this one. Please let me know if you agree with my findings on the third argument and also what stance you take on the first two. I'd love to hear it. Anyway, much love. Feel free to go check out my other videos. There's a bunch of really fun ones out there in my not so humble opinion. But for now, I will see you in the next video.